Blood. It clouded the water in deep crimson swirls, drifting toward the surface like ink spilled in slow motion. For a split second, everything was silent. The ocean, vast and endless, seemed to hold its breath. Then came the movement. A massive, shadowy figure twisted in the murky depths, sending vibrations through the water that the divers could feel in their chests. The shark, a behemoth of the deep, its body nearly 15 feet long, thrashed wildly, pain radiating from every inch of its scarred, barnacle-covered skin. Ethan's hands trembled as he gripped his dive knife, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had done the unthinkable. He had reached out. The moment his gloved fingers touched the shark's rough, barnacle-encrusted skin, his colleagues gasped through their masks, their muffled exclamations bubbling into the water. No one touched an injured great white. Not at this depth. Not when it was already agitated. But Ethan had seen the pain in its eyes. Beneath the terror-inducing rows of serrated teeth, beyond the reputation of this oceanic predator, he saw suffering. The barnacles, thousands of them, were digging into the shark's flesh, embedding themselves like a parasite infestation gone unchecked. It was agony made visible, and Ethan couldn't ignore it. As he peeled away the first barnacle, the shark twitched. Its muscles flexed, and for a heart-stopping moment, Ethan was sure he was about to be ripped apart. Then, the impossible happened. The great white stilled. The beast, a creature feared by sailors and divers alike, stopped thrashing. Its breathing, if sharks could be said to breathe, slowed. It was as if it understood. From the surface, voices crackled through the radio in the boat above. "Ethan, get out of there!" "No." But he didn't move. He couldn't. Because the moment he hesitated, the shark's massive black eyes locked onto him, and it began to turn. Not to flee. Not to attack. But to face him. And then, it opened its mouth. Ethan barely had time to react. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears as the shark's mouth gaped open, revealing rows of serrated teeth, each one capable of ripping through flesh like wet paper. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to retreat, to push off and swim for his life. But something made him stay. It wasn't aggression in the shark's movements. It wasn't lunging. It wasn't snapping its jaws shut. It was waiting. His colleagues hovered nearby, gripping their dive spears, frozen between fear and the sheer insanity of what they were witnessing. Ethan's fingers twitched around the barnacle he had just pried off. That's when he saw it, inside the shark's gaping maw, nestled between the rows of jagged teeth and pink flesh, was something unnatural. A thick, rusted fishing hook was embedded deep in its gums, nearly obscured by the barnacle growth. A long, frayed line trailed from it, disappearing into the darkness of the deep. The shark wasn't attacking. It was asking for help. A shiver crawled down Ethan's spine. He had spent years diving, studying marine life, witnessing nature in its rawest form. But this was different. This was a moment that defied every rule of the wild. Slowly, cautiously, he reached forward. The boat's radio crackled above. "Ethan, get back to the cage. That's an order." But Ethan ignored the desperate voices. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He wasn't looking at a mindless predator. He was looking at an animal in pain, one that had been suffering in silence for who knows how long. Carefully, he grabbed the hook's edge and pulled. The shark flinched, jerking slightly, sending a shudder through the water. His teammates tensed, gripping their weapons tighter. "Easy, big guy," Ethan murmured, knowing the shark couldn't hear him but hoping, somehow, it understood. The hook was buried deep. He needed leverage. He twisted his knife under the rusted metal and pushed. The shark thrashed once, whipping its tail powerfully, sending a rush of current through the water that nearly knocked Ethan off balance. His grip slipped. For a split second, he lost control, and that's when the shark moved. The great white lunged forward, and the ocean erupted in chaos. Ethan barely had time to react before the shark's massive body surged forward. Instinct took over. He twisted sideways, narrowly avoiding a direct hit from its snout. His breath hitched as the current from its powerful movement pushed him backward. His teammates shouted through their radios, their muffled voices a chorus of panic. "Ethan, get out of there! It's turning aggressive." But was it? The great white wasn't snapping its jaws or circling like a predator preparing for an attack. It was desperate. The moment Ethan lost his grip, the shark had jerked forward, toward him, not away. Almost like it wanted him to keep going. Ethan adjusted his position, steadying himself as he locked eyes with the massive creature. The fishing hook was still there, lodged deep in its gums, the barnacles still clinging to its flesh like parasites. He had a choice. Swim away and let nature take its course, or finish what he started. He chose the latter. Gripping his knife once more, he propelled himself forward, placing a firm hand on the shark's rough skin. It flinched but didn't retreat. He wedged the blade under the rusted hook, ignoring the way his fingers trembled. Come on. With one hard twist, the hook gave way, ripping free from the shark's flesh. A burst of blood billowed into the water, a dark red cloud blooming around them. The reaction was instant. The shark jerked violently, thrashing as the sudden relief of pain sent shockwaves through its system. Ethan was flung backward, his air bubbles escaping in rapid bursts as he fought to stabilize himself. Then, silence. The great white hovered in the water, its massive body eerily still. For the first time, Ethan felt something strange in its gaze. Not just relief, but recognition. Then, just as quickly as the chaos began, the shark turned, flicked its tail, and disappeared into the deep. Ethan let out a long, shaky breath. His teammates swam toward him, their faces pale even through their masks. "Are you insane?" One of them, Mark, shouted through his regulator, his voice distorted. "You just pulled a fishing hook out of a great white's mouth." Ethan grinned, still catching his breath. "Yeah, I think I did." But something gnawed at the back of his mind. The way the shark had looked at him before swimming away, it wasn't just an animal reacting to pain. It was something more. And whatever it was, Ethan had a feeling this wasn't the last time he would see that shark. He just didn't realize how soon that would be. The crew was silent as they hauled themselves back onto the boat, their wetsuits dripping, the ocean clinging to them like an invisible weight. The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, casting the waves in hues of deep orange and crimson. Ethan pulled off his mask, his breath still uneven from what had just happened. No one spoke for a long time. Then Mark broke the silence. "What the hell was that?" His voice was somewhere between disbelief and frustration. "You could have been torn apart." Ethan ran a hand through his soaked hair. "It wasn't attacking." Mark scoffed. "It wasn't attacking? Ethan, it was a great white shark. A 15-foot predator. And you put your hand in its mouth." "I know what I saw," Ethan said, calmer than he felt. "That thing was in pain. It wanted help." Maya, the team's marine biologist, was gripping the edge of the boat, staring out at the water. "I don't know, Mark. I think Ethan's right." Mark turned on her. "You're kidding." She shook her head. "Sharks don't behave like that. If it wanted to attack, it would have. That wasn't aggression. That was something else." Silence settled over the boat again. The only sound was the waves slapping against the hull, the distant cry of a gull overhead. Ethan exhaled. "Either way, it's gone now." But as those words left his mouth, the water around them shifted. It was subtle at first, a ripple, a distortion in the ocean's surface. Then, a shadow emerged from below, rising like something out of a nightmare. The great white was back. Maya sucked in a sharp breath. No way. It wasn't just passing through. It was circling the boat, slow and deliberate, its massive dorsal fin cutting through the water like a knife. Mark backed up. "Okay, no. This is not normal." Ethan stepped toward the edge, his pulse quickening. The shark wasn't showing any signs of aggression. No rapid darting. No sudden movements. It was just there, watching them. "What does it want?" Maya whispered. Then Ethan saw it. Just beneath the water's surface, near the shark's underbelly, something gleamed. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the light, but no. It was metal. His breath caught in his throat. "It's injured." The barnacles weren't the only problem. A harpoon tip was buried deep in its side, barely visible beneath the thick growth of parasites. This shark had been hunted. Ethan's grip tightened on the boat railing. Someone had tried to kill it. And judging by the way it was staying near them, it wasn't done asking for help. The realization sent a chill down his spine. This wasn't just an injured animal. This was something far bigger. And whatever had wounded the shark in the first place, it was still out there. Now, I want to ask, what would you have done in Ethan's place? Would you try to help, or would you keep your distance? Let me know in the comments. And if you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Ethan's grip on the boat's railing tightened as he stared at the massive shark gliding just beneath the surface. The harpoon tip embedded in its side wasn't just an old wound, it was fresh. "This shark has been hunted," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. Maya leaned over the edge, squinting into the water. "That harpoon, it's not from an accident. Someone did this on purpose." Mark cursed under his breath. "And now it thinks we're gonna help it." He gestured wildly. "This is insane. Sharks don't do this. They don't just ask for help." Ethan wasn't so sure anymore. His pulse hammered as he watched the great white continue to circle the boat, its movements slower now, almost hesitant. It was staying close, just like before. Then, without warning, the shark dove. A collective breath was held. The water stilled. The shadow disappeared beneath the waves. Mark exhaled. Good. It's gone. But Ethan wasn't convinced. Something about this felt wrong. And then, before anyone could react, the boat lurched. A powerful force slammed against the hull, sending a jolt through the deck. Maya stumbled, grabbing onto Ethan's arm. Mark cursed as he nearly lost his footing. What the hell was that? Another thud, this time stronger. The boat rocked violently. Panic surged through the crew. Ethan scrambled to the side, peering down into the water. That's when he saw it. Not the shark. Something else. A dark, hulking mass moved beneath the boat, larger than anything Ethan had ever seen before. It was a shape, a shadow stretching impossibly long, gliding just beneath them. Maya gasped. That's not a shark." Ethan's mouth went dry. "No," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "It's something bigger." Then, from the depths, a second shadow appeared, smaller, but just as menacing. Mark went rigid. What the? Ethan's mind raced. The shark's injury, the harpoon, the way it kept coming back. It wasn't just wounded. It was running from something. And now, whatever it had been running from, had found them. The ocean around them felt different now. Darker, heavier. Ethan's stomach clenched as he stared into the depths, his breath shallow. The great white had vanished, but the thing beneath them hadn't. Mark clutched the railing, his knuckles white. "Tell me I'm not the only one seeing this." Maya swallowed hard. "You're not." The second shadow, the smaller one, began moving upward. Slowly, deliberately. Ethan's pulse quickened as the shape grew clearer. At first, he thought it was another shark, but as it emerged from the depths, the truth became horrifyingly clear. It was a harpooned great white. Dead. Its body floated lifelessly, its eyes dull, its underbelly slashed open. The gaping wound exposed shredded muscle and bone, as if something had fed on it. The harpoon that had struck it was still embedded in its side, identical to the one Ethan had seen lodged in the living shark. Maya recoiled. "Oh my God!" Mark stumbled back, his face pale. "We need to leave. Now." But Ethan was frozen. His eyes drifted back to the water, searching for the bigger shadow. Then, the realization hit him like a gut punch. The wounded great white had come to them for help, because it wasn't the biggest thing in these waters. A monstrous figure loomed beneath the floating corpse. It was massive, moving with an eerie grace, and Ethan caught a glimpse of something terrifying, dark, ridged skin and jagged scars crisscrossing its body. Whatever it was, it had been in battles before. Maya's voice was tight with fear. "That's not a shark." Mark grabbed Ethan's arm. "We're not sticking around to find out what it is. We leave. Now." Ethan's instincts screamed at him to agree, to get as far away from this thing as possible. But something wasn't adding up. Why were these sharks being hunted? Why had the first great white come to them? And what was lurking beneath them right now? Before he could answer, the boat lurched again, Only this time, it wasn't from below. The first shark, the one Ethan had helped, had returned. It wasn't running anymore. It was facing the monster in the deep. The ocean held its breath. Ethan gripped the boat's railing so tightly his fingers ached. The first great white, the one he had helped, was no longer circling aimlessly. It was facing the monstrous shape lurking beneath the dead shark. And it wasn't backing down. The water around them churned as the two creatures moved. The great white, though massive, was dwarfed by whatever was rising from the depths. Ethan could see it more clearly now, thicker than a shark, with deep scars slashing across its rough, ridged body. Its movements were slow, calculated. A predator. Maya exhaled shakily. That's not a shark. Mark shook his head, backing away from the railing. I don't care what it is. We're leaving right now. But Ethan couldn't move. Something about this moment felt wrong. Not just the horror of the situation, but the way the great white was acting. It wasn't trying to escape. It wasn't hunting. It was challenging whatever was down there. Ethan's mind raced. Maya, have you ever seen a shark do this before? She shook her head. Never. They're top predators, but they don't pick fights unless they have to. Mark growled in frustration. Exactly. Which means it has to. Then, the shadow in the deep shifted. It was rising. Ethan barely had time to react before the ocean erupted. A massive, prehistoric-looking creature burst through the surface, sending a towering wave crashing against the boat. Ethan's body slammed against the railing as cold water drenched him. Maya screamed. The thing was enormous, easily twice the size of the great white. Its head was broader, its body built like an armored war machine, covered in deep scars. And its teeth, jagged, thick, designed to crush bone. Ethan's breath hitched. He knew what this was. Bull shark, he whispered. But this wasn't just any bull shark, it was a monster. One that had survived battles, grown unnaturally large, and learned to kill anything in its way. The great white lunged. The bull shark reacted instantly, twisting its body with terrifying speed and ramming into the great white's side. The force sent a shockwave through the water. Ethan's stomach lurched as he watched the great white struggle to counter. But the bull shark was faster, meaner, more experienced in a fight. It clamped its jaws down on the great white's already injured side. Blood billowed in a dark red cloud. Maya gasped. No, it's going to kill it. Ethan felt something cold settle in his gut. He had helped the great white once, and now it was fighting for its life. Was he supposed to just stand there and watch? He clenched his jaw, eyes darting to the spear gun strapped to the side of the boat. If he got involved, he might make things worse. But if he didn't, the great white was going to die. And Ethan owed it more than that. Ethan's heart pounded like a war drum against his ribs. The ocean, once serene, was now a battlefield. The bull shark, a brutal juggernaut of muscle and scars, had the great white in its jaws, thrashing violently. Blood spilled into the water in thick clouds, twisting like red smoke beneath the waves. Maya gripped Ethan's arm. We have to do something. Mark shook his head furiously. Are you insane? We can't interfere. That's nature. Ethan's fists clenched. Nature or not, this wasn't a fair fight. The great white was already wounded. It had come to them for help. And now, it was about to die. His gaze darted to the spear gun strapped to the side of the boat. A single shot wouldn't kill the bull shark, not a monster that big. But maybe, just maybe, he could buy the great white a fighting chance. Ethan lunged for the spear gun. Mark swore. Ethan, don't. But he was already moving. His fingers wrapped around the grip. In one swift motion, he yanked it free, braced himself against the rocking boat, and took aim. The bull shark twisted violently, dragging the great white down deeper, jaws still clamped on its side. Ethan exhaled slowly, narrowing his sights. One shot. He squeezed the trigger. The spear launched through the water like a lightning bolt, striking the bull shark just behind the gills. It wasn't a fatal hit, but it was enough. The beast jerked, releasing the great white in a cloud of blood and bubbles. The great white, free for the first time, did something Ethan didn't expect. Instead of fleeing, it turned, and it fought back. The bull shark, dazed from the spear wound, hesitated for a fraction of a second. That was all the great white needed. It lunged, jaws gaping, and clamped down on the bull shark's head with a force that sent shockwaves through the water. The bull shark thrashed. But this time, the great white didn't let go. Ethan and the crew watched, breathless, as the two titans of the deep battled in a storm of blood and foam. The great white, once weak and injured, had turned the tide. It wasn't fighting for dominance anymore. It was fighting to survive. With a final bone-crunching shake, the great white ripped free and sent the bull shark spiraling downward into the depths, disappearing into the abyss. Silence. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the water lapping against the boat, the eerie quiet after the storm. Then, the great white turned, and it looked at Ethan. Not in fear, not in anger, but in something deeper. Recognition. Ethan felt a chill run through him. It wasn't just a wild animal anymore. It knew. Then, without another moment's hesitation, the great white swam away, vanishing into the open sea. Ethan exhaled shakily. His fingers loosened around the spear gun. Maya was the first to speak. I can't believe that just happened. Mark let out a nervous laugh. We're either the dumbest people on the planet or the luckiest. Ethan just stared at the horizon, the adrenaline still coursing through him. He had saved the great white. But deep down, he knew this wasn't over. Somewhere out there, sharks were being hunted. And someone was responsible. The boat rocked gently on the water, the aftermath of the battle leaving an eerie stillness in the air. Ethan's pulse was finally beginning to slow, but his mind was racing. He had just saved a great white shark from certain death. And it had looked at him. Not like a mindless predator, not like an animal acting on instinct. It had recognized him. Mark exhaled sharply, running a hand through his wet hair. I don't know what just happened, but I want to forget about it immediately. Maya shook her head, still gripping the railing as she stared at the blood cloud dispersing in the water. No, this isn't something we forget. Ethan, that shark, it came to you. Ethan swallowed hard. I know. Mark scoffed. Oh, so we're just agreeing now that sharks have feelings? That they understand us? Maya turned to him, her voice firm. Animals know more than we think, Mark. And this one, it came for help. Twice. A heavy silence settled over the crew. Ethan turned his gaze to the horizon, his mind buzzing with questions. Someone had shot that great white with a harpoon. Someone had already killed at least one other. And judging by the wounds on the bull shark, this wasn't just a random attack. This was something bigger. Ethan's grip tightened on the railing. We need to find out who's doing this. Mark stared at him like he'd lost his mind. We need to go home, tell this story over a couple of beers, and never come back. But Ethan wasn't listening anymore. Because at that moment, a faint thunk echoed from beneath the boat. Everyone froze. Maya's eyes widened. Did you hear that? Mark's voice dropped. Tell me that was just the engine shifting. Ethan turned, scanning the water. The ocean was still. No sign of the great white. No sign of the bull shark. Then, another thunk. Louder. This time, the boat shuddered. Panic flashed in Mark's eyes. Nope. Nope. I'm done. Let's go. Now. Ethan ignored him, rushing to the other side of the boat. He grabbed a waterproof flashlight, flicked it on, and leaned over the edge, pointing the beam down into the water. The light cut through the darkness. At first, he saw nothing but the deep blue abyss. Then, something moved. A dark shape. Too small to be a shark. Something metallic. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. It was a diving cage. Or what was left of one. Mangled metal. Torn wiring. The bars were bent outward, as if something had forced its way out. Maya whispered, "Oh my God!" Ethan's stomach twisted. This wasn't just a dead shark. This wasn't just a wounded animal. Someone had been down there. And whatever they were doing, they hadn't survived it. The shredded diving cage swayed gently beneath the surface, its broken metal bars twisted and gaping. It looked like a coffin that had been ripped open from the inside. Ethan's stomach tightened. That's not just a random wreck. Maya nodded slowly. Someone was down there. Mark shook his head furiously. Was. Past tense. And I don't want to find out what happened to them. Ethan kept the flashlight trained on the cage. The water around it was eerily still, save for the occasional swirl of drifting debris. Small fish darted in and out of the wreckage, but there was no sign of its occupant. No air tank. No equipment. No body. Something tore that thing apart, Maya whispered. Ethan adjusted the flashlight beam, searching for any clue as to what had happened. That's when he saw it. Something was attached to the cage. A thick rope, no, a cable, still tethered the wreckage to something below. The line disappeared into the darkness, vanishing into the unknown. Ethan's pulse quickened. It's still anchored. Maya sucked in a breath. Which means someone put it there on purpose. Mark threw up his hands. All right, you know what? I'm done. We saw a shark fight a monster, we pulled a hook from a great white's mouth, and now we've got some kind of sunken nightmare tied to the seafloor. I say we leave before whatever did this comes back. But Ethan wasn't listening. He was already pulling on his diving gear. Mark's jaw dropped. Oh, come on. Maya frowned. Ethan, you can't seriously be thinking of going down there. Ethan clipped his knife to his belt, testing the regulator. That cage wasn't just abandoned. Someone was hunting these sharks. And if we don't figure out who, it's just going to keep happening. Mark crossed his arms. Or we end up like whatever poor soul was in that cage. Ethan glanced at Maya, silently asking for backup. She hesitated. Then, finally, she sighed. I'll go with you. Mark groaned. Oh, for the love of, fine. But I'm staying up here. And if you don't come back in 10 minutes, I'm leaving your butts to rot on the ocean floor. Ethan smirked, slipping his mask over his face. Appreciate the support. With a final deep breath, he and Maya plunged into the water. The ocean swallowed them instantly. The deeper they swam, the darker it got. The wrecked cage hung eerily in place, swaying with the current, its broken bars twisted and covered in scratches. Ethan's flashlight beam followed the cable downward. It stretched into the abyss, anchored to something buried in the deep. Maya's voice crackled through the communicator. You seeing this? Ethan nodded. Yeah. And I don't like it. They kept descending, the pressure pressing against their bodies. The ocean felt wrong down here. Too quiet. Too still. Then, Ethan's light landed on something unnatural. A shape. Something huge, just barely visible in the darkness. His breath hitched. Maya. I think we found what they were hunting. Maya moved beside him, her flashlight flicking on. The beam illuminated the object, and both of them went still. It wasn't another shark. It was a submarine. An old one, rusted and half buried in the sand, its hull covered in deep gashes. The cable from the cage was attached to it, as if someone had been using the wreck for something. Ethan's mind raced. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't just some lost piece of history. Someone had been here recently. Then, Maya grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his wetsuit. Ethan turned to her, but she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at something just past his shoulder. He followed her gaze. A human skull rested in the sand. And it wasn't alone. Scattered around the submarine were the remains of multiple bodies, bones stripped clean, picked apart by time, by scavengers, or by something else. Maya's breathing hitched. Ethan, we need to go. Then, the water shifted. A slow, rolling movement. Not from a current. From something alive. Ethan barely had time to react before a dark shape began to emerge from the wreckage. Something massive. Something that had been waiting. The ocean around them grew deathly still. Ethan's flashlight beam quivered over the skeletal remains strewn across the ocean floor. Skulls. Ribs. Scattered, broken bones, all eerily clean, stripped down as if something had fed on them. Maya's grip tightened on his arm. Her breathing came in quick, panicked bursts through her regulator. Then, the water moved. Not a ripple. Not a current. Something was stirring. A dark shape unfurled from the shadows of the wrecked submarine. At first, Ethan couldn't tell what it was. A massive, sinewy form, its body coiled like a serpent, its skin rough and ridged. Then he saw its eyes. Two reflective, slitted orbs glowed dimly in the darkness, locking onto them with an eerie, unsettling intelligence. Maya's voice crackled through the comms, barely a whisper. "Ethan, that's a giant moray eel." Ethan's stomach dropped. The creature slithered forward, its elongated body stretching easily over 30 feet. Its thick, muscular form undulated through the water with eerie grace. The scars along its hide hinted at years of battle, at survival in the harshest conditions. And its mouth, lined with jagged backward-facing teeth, gaped slightly, revealing a secondary set of jaws deeper in its throat. A nightmare from the abyss. Maya stiffened beside him. I didn't think they got this big." Ethan could barely breathe. Giant moray eels were known for their aggression, their ability to strike with lightning speed, their impossibly strong bite force. And this was a monster. It slithered between the wreckage with unnatural ease, its massive body coiling through the twisted remains of the submarine. And as Ethan watched, he realized something even worse. This wasn't just a wild animal lurking in a wreck. This eel had claimed it, like a lair. And judging by the bones littered across the seafloor, it had been feeding for a long time. Maya's breathing turned ragged. "Ethan, we need to go. Now." Ethan nodded, moving slowly, trying not to make any sudden motions. But the eel's eyes followed them, unblinking. It wasn't just watching. It was calculating. Then it moved. The eel lunged. A blur of motion, too fast, too powerful. Ethan barely had time to react before the beast's gaping jaws snapped inches from his arm. He kicked back violently, barely avoiding a crushing bite. Maya screamed through the comms. The eel twisted with terrifying speed, its muscular body coiling around the wreckage, then shooting toward them again. Ethan's instincts took over. He grabbed Maya's wrist and yanked her upward, kicking off the seafloor with everything he had. The eel pursued, its sleek, monstrous body moving effortlessly through the water. Ethan could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. He reached for his dive knife, knowing it was useless against something this big. The eel struck again. Its jaws snapped onto Ethan's oxygen tank, yanking him backward. Panic surged through him as he struggled, the beast's teeth scraping against metal, its vice-like grip tightening. His air supply hissed as the hose bent under pressure. Then, a sudden movement. A shadow darted through the water. Something massive collided with the eel, slamming into it with raw, brutal force. Ethan felt the impact in his bones. The eel thrashed violently, its grip loosening as it turned to face the new threat. Ethan and Maya were flung backward, tumbling through the water. Ethan whipped his head around, and his heart stopped. The great white was back. It wasn't alone. Two more great whites emerged from the murky deep, circling the eel with slow, deliberate movements. The eel recoiled, its massive body twisting, its jaws snapping at the sharks. But the great whites didn't retreat. They didn't flee. They were hunting it. Ethan grabbed Maya's arm and signaled up. They didn't wait. They swam like hell. As they ascended, Ethan stole one last glance at the battle below. The sharks lunged. The eel struck back. And as the water darkened with blood, Ethan realized the ocean had its own rules. And tonight, it was settling a score. What do you think? Were the sharks defending their territory, or was this something else? Let me know in the comments. And if you're hooked on this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Things are only getting wilder. The ascent was harrowing. Ethan and Maya propelled themselves upward with controlled but urgent movements, maintaining their composure despite the chaos unraveling below. The water surrounding them was thick with suspended particles, a mixture of disturbed sediment and the crimson aftermath of the unfolding conflict between the sharks and the monstrous eel. Ethan's mind raced as he processed what he had just witnessed. While territorial disputes among marine predators were not unheard of, the behavior exhibited by these great whites was anomalous. Cooperative hunting among great whites had never been documented to this degree. It defied conventional understanding of shark behavior. Maya's voice crackled through the comms, tinged with urgency. "We need to reach the boat. The bull shark might be gone, But if there's an apex predator of that size down here, we have no idea what else is lurking. Ethan agreed, but his mind remained fixated on the implications. The eel was not merely a rogue anomaly. It had carved out a hunting ground within the wreckage of the old submarine, feeding indiscriminately on anything that ventured too close. The skeletal remains on the ocean floor were stark evidence of its prolonged reign. As they ascended, Ethan stole one last glance downward. The sharks were relentless, using their speed and mass to counteract the eel's muscular constriction techniques. The eel, in turn, moved with an uncanny efficiency, using the wreckage for cover, striking and retreating with calculated precision. Maya's voice snapped him back to focus. "Ethan, we're almost at the surface. Mark should be ready to pull us up." He nodded and scanned above. Through the refracted light of the setting sun, he could just make out the shadow of the boat. They were nearly there. Then, a noise. A deep, resonant sound vibrated through the water, unlike anything Ethan had ever heard. It was low frequency, powerful, and unnatural. Maya stiffened. "Ethan, did you hear that?" Before he could respond, another wave of sound pulsed through the depths, closer this time. It wasn't mechanical, and it wasn't from any known marine species. Ethan's gut twisted. Something else was down here. Their heads broke the surface, and Mark was already reaching for them. "Get in." "No." Ethan threw his regulator aside and grasped Mark's outstretched hand, hauling himself onto the deck. Maya followed immediately, gasping for breath. Mark's face was pale. What the hell just happened down there? Ethan barely had time to respond before a massive shockwave hit the boat. The entire vessel rocked violently. Mark stumbled backward, grabbing onto the railing as Maya fell to her knees. Ethan steadied himself just in time to see something enormous breach the surface several yards away. At first, he thought it was the eel, somehow surfacing despite its deep-sea nature. But then he saw the fins. Not a shark. Not an eel. A colossal manta ray. But this was no ordinary manta. Its wingspan was over 25 feet, its body covered in thick scars, a creature forged in the battles of the deep. Its jet-black form contrasted sharply against the crimson-tinged water. It moved with an eerie grace, gliding just beneath the surface before disappearing back into the depths. Maya's breath caught. That thing's mutated. Ethan's mind reeled. A manta ray of that size was unheard of outside of deep, uncharted waters. And if it had been lurking near the submarine wreckage, then whatever had caused that deep, resonant sound moments ago was even bigger. The sea was too still. Ethan, Maya, and Mark remained frozen on the deck, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. The colossal manta ray had vanished into the depths, but the low, vibrating sound still echoed in Ethan's bones. Something was still down there. Mark finally spoke, his voice hoarse. I don't know how much more of this I can take." Ethan ignored him, gripping the railing, eyes locked on the water. The ocean stretched infinitely in all directions, but he felt something lurking just beneath the surface. Maya pulled off her mask, shaking her head. "We need answers." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. The submarine wreck. The skeletal remains. The eel's lair. The massive manta ray. And now, this sound. It was not natural. It was deliberate. Almost communicative. Mark ran a hand through his wet hair. "I don't know what's worse, sharks working together, a mutant eel, or a manta ray the size of a damn airplane." Maya turned to Ethan. "That sound, you think it was from the ray?" Ethan exhaled slowly. "No." Maya's face paled. "Then what was it?" Another vibration pulsed through the boat. Ethan's stomach dropped. This time, it wasn't distant. Mark swore, gripping the railing as the boat lurched violently. Maya grabbed Ethan's arm. "Ethan, talk to me." He stared down into the water, then saw it. A shape. Vast. Monstrous. Moving below them like a shadow stretching across the ocean floor. His breath caught in his throat. "Oh my God!" Maya followed his gaze, then gasped. It was bigger than the eel. Bigger than the great whites. Bigger than the boat itself. And it was rising. Ethan's voice came out in a whisper. "What the hell is that?" Then, the head emerged. A grotesque, armored face, plated in thick, bony ridges, its yellow, alien-like eyes staring up at them. A giant Pacific sleeper shark. A prehistoric-looking behemoth, nearly 30 feet long, its body covered in deep scars, evidence of decades of survival. Sleeper sharks were rare. They thrived in the abyss, in near-freezing temperatures, scavenging the ocean floor. But this one, it had adapted. It wasn't scavenging. It was hunting. Maya stumbled backward. That thing isn't supposed to be here. The sleeper shark turned, its massive mouth gaping open, revealing rows of jagged teeth, not designed for tearing flesh like a great white's, but for grinding through bone and armor. Ethan's mind reeled. The eel, the manta, the cage, the wreck. It all made sense now. This was the apex predator of these waters. The eel had ruled the wreck. The great whites had defended their territory. The manta had surfaced, a warning. And this thing, this ancient survivor of the deep, had just come to claim its next meal. The sleeper shark lunged. The sleeper shark lunged, its massive bulk propelling it toward the boat like a torpedo. Ethan threw himself back as the water exploded around them. The shark's broad, scarred head smashed into the hull, rocking the boat so violently that Maya was thrown onto the deck. Mark screamed as he clung to the railing. Ethan barely had time to process before the shark struck again. Bam! The entire boat lurched sideways, sending a cascade of seawater over the deck. Equipment slid across the floor, a toolbox tipping open, spilling knives and tools toward the edge. Maya scrambled to her feet. Ethan! It's trying to sink us. Mark was already fumbling for the radio. Mayday! Mayday! This is the Orca. We're under attack by, he faltered, voice cracking. By a sleeper shark the size of a bus. Static. No response. Ethan's heart pounded. They were too far from shore. No one was coming to help. Another thud against the hull. Ethan turned to Maya. We need to scare it off before it capsizes us. Mark shouted, and how exactly do we do that? Politely ask it to leave. Maya grabbed a flare gun from the emergency kit. No. We blind it. Ethan's eyes widened. That might actually work. Sleeper sharks thrived in the darkness of the deep. Their eyes were sensitive to sudden bursts of light. If they could disorient it... Boom! The boat tilted hard as the shark rammed them again. The deck cracked, a deep groan of splintering wood echoing as the hull started to give way. Maya loaded the flare gun, bracing herself. If this doesn't work, we're dead. Ethan grabbed onto the mast. Fire it right at its face. The sleeper shark surfaced again, its monstrous yellow eyes glowing like lanterns beneath the water. Maya aimed and fired. A blazing red flare streaked through the night, straight into the shark's open maw. The effect was instantaneous. The shark recoiled violently, thrashing so hard that a massive wave slammed against the boat, nearly flipping them over. Its mouth snapped shut, swallowing the flare, its throat glowing red from the inside as the fire burned for a few brief, agonizing moments. Then it dove. A deep, guttural boom rumbled through the water as the beast vanished into the abyss. Silence. No more impacts. No more shaking. Just the sound of waves slapping against the broken hull. Maya collapsed onto the deck, gasping. Please tell me that worked. Ethan stared at the dark ocean, his breath ragged. The shark was gone. But for how long? Mark exhaled a shaking breath, pressing his forehead against the railing. I am never getting in the water again. Ethan, still gripping the mast, watched the horizon. Something told him this wasn't over. Somewhere, in the black depths below, the sleeper shark was still lurking, watching. And next time, it might not be alone. The ocean was eerily quiet. Ethan, Maya, and Mark sat in stunned silence on the battered deck of the boat. The Orca rocked unsteadily, its hull cracked from the sleeper shark's brutal attacks. The red glow of the flare had faded into darkness, swallowed by the abyss. For a long time, none of them spoke. Mark finally broke the silence. So, do we just pretend that didn't happen? Maya let out a hollow laugh, rubbing her temples. Oh yeah, totally. Let's just head back, grab a beer, and never speak of this again. Ethan wasn't laughing. His eyes remained locked on the water. The sleeper shark had retreated. But for how long? These creatures, the great white, the eel, the manta ray, and now this prehistoric beast, they weren't acting like normal marine life. They were adapting. The flare had worked because the shark wasn't accustomed to light. It had spent decades in the deep, evolving in ways science had never documented. But if it could learn, if it could adjust, would it come back? Maya nudged him. Ethan, talk to me. He finally turned to her, exhaling slowly. We need to report this. Mark scoffed. To who? Hey, we just fought an ancient sleeper shark that almost ate us alive. And oh, by the way, sharks are working together now? Yeah, that'll go over well. Ethan ignored him. The harpoons, the sunken submarine, the cage. Someone was down there hunting these creatures. We need to find out who and why. Maya frowned. You think this was more than just illegal poaching? Ethan nodded. Something bigger is happening out here. That sleeper shark wasn't just surviving, it was dominating. And the great whites knew it. That eel knew it. Mark rubbed his face, exhausted. So, what? You're saying there's some secret war going on beneath the ocean? Ethan didn't answer. He just stared into the water. A feeling crawled up his spine, an unsettling certainty. This wasn't just about one predator. Something was shifting. The rules of the ocean were changing, and humans had no idea what they were about to face. What do you think is really going on in the ocean? Are creatures evolving in ways we don't understand? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you loved this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.